Smoke drifted through the ruins, mixing with the smell of burning metal and dust. Daniel moved carefully between broken walls, his rifle ready, his ears listening for any sound. The war between humans and the alien race called the Elyari had turned the city into a graveyard. Most buildings were destroyed, streets were filled with debris, and there was no sign of life. He thought he was alone here, until he heard it, a faint, trembling cry. It was so soft that at first he thought it was the wind. But then it came again, a sound of pain and fear. Daniel froze. Scanning the shadows, he followed the sound, moving quietly over rubble and shattered glass. At last, he saw her. She was lying against a wall, her body half buried under fallen beams. Her skin was pale blue, glowing faintly under the dust. Blood dark silver in color pooled beneath her. Her breathing was shallow, each inhale shaky and weak. Daniel's training told him to be careful, that she could be dangerous, but another part of him, the human part, told him she was just a girl, young, hurt, and dying. He knelt beside her, feeling for a pulse. It was faint, almost gone. "Stay with me," he whispered, though he knew she probably didn't understand his language. Her eyes opened just a little. They were a deep violet, staring into his with something he couldn't read. Fear, maybe, or hope. He quickly checked his medic kit. Empty. He'd used the last of his supplies on his own squad before they were evacuated. There was no time to call for help, and no one would come here anyway. The wound in her side was bad. She had lost too much blood. Then an idea came to him. One so reckless, it almost made him laugh. He had read old reports that Elyari blood was not toxic to humans, and vice versa. But there were no studies about what happened if it was mixed directly. Still, it was the only way. He tore open his sleeve, took a small field tube, and pressed it into a vein on his arm. Blood began to flow, warm and red. He connected the other end of the tube to a wound near her vein. For a moment, nothing happened. Then her body shivered, her breathing slowed, steadied, her violet eyes opened wider, locking onto him. It was as if she could feel his heartbeat inside her. Daniel kept his eyes on her. Minutes passed, her color returned. The glow in her skin, stronger now. When he pulled the tube away, she didn't look away from Asu. She didn't look away from him. Her lips parted, and in a soft, accented voice, she spoke, "Human. Now you are inside me." Daniel frowned, thinking it was just confusion. "You're safe now," he said, standing up, but she kept watching him as if something had just changed forever. That night, they stayed in a small, half-collapsed shelter. Daniel built a fire to keep her warm. She sat close to him, her gaze never leaving his face. Whenever he moved, her head turned to follow him. At one point, she reached out and touched his arm where the blood had come from. Her fingers lingered. Almost in wonder, Daniel didn't understand why she looked at him with such intensity. He told himself it was just gratitude. But deep down, something about her eyes made him uneasy. Not in a bad way, but in a way he couldn't explain. She didn't speak again for hours. When she finally did, it was while staring at the fire. "In my people's way," she said slowly, choosing her words. "You are more than a savior now." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "What does that mean?" She looked at him, and for a moment the flickering firelight reflected in her violet eyes like tiny stars. "It means, you have joined with me," she whispered. He didn't know what to say to that. Her voice was calm, but there was a strange certainty in it, and though he didn't understand her meaning, he couldn't shake the feeling that saving her had changed more than he realized. Outside, the wind howled through the ruins. But inside the small shelter, Daniel felt a strange warmth, not just from the fire, but from the girl sitting beside him. He didn't even know her name yet, but he knew this tomorrow. When the sun rose, they would have to move, and for some reason, he had no intention of leaving her behind, because something told him this was only the beginning. Asterisk, when morning came, Daniel was already awake. The city was quiet, the only sound the soft crackle of the dying fire. The alien girl still sitting. Close to him, stirred and opened her eyes. She looked stronger. The weakness in her face replaced by something else. Something. Aware, Daniel handed her a small canteen. She took it slowly, her fingers brushing his. And for a brief second, he felt a faint rush in his chest. It wasn't pain. More like a strange pulse that wasn't his own. She drank, then wiped her lips. In a way that seemed almost shy. "I am Leora," she said softly. Daniel nodded. "Daniel." Her violet eyes studied him as if memorizing every detail of his face. "You gave me life," she said. "That means." "You are my bond," Daniel frowned. "Your bond." She nodded, her expression calm, almost certain, in my people's way. "Blood is more than life," she explained. "It is the soul, the connection, the future." Daniel tried to laugh. "It off well where I'm from. It's just blood." But she shook her head. "No, human. It is not just blood." The day passed slowly as they moved from ruin to ruin, avoiding patrols. Daniel kept glancing back at her. She followed him closely, her steps careful but steady. At one point, she stumbled, and without thinking, he caught her arm the moment their skin touched. That strange pulse came again, stronger this time. Leora's breathing changed, and for a heartbeat, it seemed like she was glowing. Daniel quickly let go, unsure what he had just felt. They kept moving, but he couldn't stop noticing small things when he was thirsty. She reached for water before he even asked. When his leg cramped, she slowed her pace without him, telling her it was as if she could sense what he felt before he said a word. That evening, they found shelter in the shell of a collapsed temple. Faded carvings covered the walls, symbols Daniel couldn't understand. Leora sat beside him, as the shadows grew. "Daniel," she began, "do you know why your blood saved me when no medicine could?" He shook his head. "I'm guessing it's luck." Her gaze locked onto his, steady and unblinking. "It is because our bodies and our souls are now linked," she said. Daniel leaned back. "Linked? How?" Leora took his hand and pressed it gently against her chest. Her heartbeat was fast, but steady. "When I was a child," she said, "the elders spoke of an ancient joining, one that only happened when two were meant to share life." Daniel pulled his hand back, feeling a little uneasy. "You're saying this is fate?" "I am saying," she replied, "that I will never be apart from you now." Later that night, Daniel tried to sleep, but every time he closed his eyes, he could feel her presence. Not just physically, but somewhere deeper. It was like a faint echo in his mind. When she shifted position, he knew without looking. When she sighed, he felt the reason for it. He told himself it was just exhaustion and stress, but part of him feared she might be right. At dawn, Daniel woke to find Leora already watching him. She tilted her head slightly. "You dream of fire," she said. Daniel froze. "How do you know that?" Her answer was simple. "Because I felt it too." That was when he realized this bond, whatever it was, went beyond simple survival. He had given her his blood, but in return, she had taken something from him too, and somehow, he didn't feel like it was a bad thing. They walked all morning, the silence between them strange but not uncomfortable. When they stopped to rest, Leora sat very close, her shoulder brushing his. "Daniel," she said suddenly, "if danger comes, you must let me stand in front." He smirked. "That's not how it works. I protect you." But she shook her head firmly. "No, I protect you." Before he could argue, she added in a whisper that sent a shiver through him. "You carry more than yourself now." Daniel frowned. "What does that mean?" She turned to him slowly, her violet eyes unblinking. "It means, you are my child's father." The words hit him like a shockwave for a long moment. Daniel just stared at her, thinking he had misheard. "That's possible," he said. Leora shook her head. "In my body, your blood awoke life." Daniel laughed once, but it was hollow. "We're not even the same species." Her hand went to her stomach, her fingers curling gently. "Life does not care for species," she said. "It only cares for the bond." Daniel didn't answer. He couldn't, because deep inside, a small voice was whispering that she believed every word, and what frightened him most was that part of him was starting to believe it too. Daniel didn't move for a long moment. Her words echoed in his head, refusing to fade. "You are my child's father." He wanted to dismiss it, to tell her she was mistaken, but the way she said it, calm and certain, made his voice catch in his throat. Leora didn't look away. She sat on the dusty stone floor of the temple ruins. One hand still on her stomach, Daniel forced himself to speak. "Listen, that's not how it works. It's just blood, nothing more." Her violet eyes softened, but her voice stayed steady. "In my people, blood is life. Blood is creation, and when it is shared, new life can begin." Daniel shook his head. "No, that's impossible," but Leora only tilted her head. As if listening to something far away. "It has already begun," she whispered. Daniel pushed to his feet and started pacing. He told himself it was stress, exhaustion, maybe even a side effect of the blood transfer she was probably imagining. But a small unwanted thought dug into his mind. What if she wasn't? He stopped and faced her. "You're saying there's something growing inside you because of me." She nodded once, without hesitation. Daniel's stomach tightened. This wasn't a conversation he ever thought he'd have in the middle of an alien war zone. Before he could say more, movement caught his eye. In the doorway of the ruins, a shadow shifted. Daniel's hand went to his rifle instantly. Two alien figures stepped into view, both in light armor with the crest of the Elyari Council on their chests. Their eyes locked on Leora. One of them spoke sharply in their language, the tone urgent and commanding. Leora's face went pale. "They know," she murmured. "They have come for me?" Daniel stepped in front of her without thinking. Rifle raised, the soldiers didn't attack. Not yet, but their stance was tense. They spoke again, their words clipped and cold. Leora translated quickly. "They say, I am to be taken to the council for purification." Daniel didn't need to ask what that meant. His jaw tightened. Not happening. The soldier's eyes narrowed. Then, without warning, one of them lunged forward. The fight was quick but brutal. Daniel ducked under a blade, strike, and fired once, the shot hitting the attacker's shoulder. The second soldier swung a staff-like weapon, the energy tip grazing Daniel's side. Pain flared, but he didn't stop. He slammed the butt of his rifle into the soldier's chest, knocking him back. Leora grabbed Daniel's arm. "We must run." They slipped out through a broken wall and into the maze of ruined streets. Behind them, shouts rose. More soldiers were coming. They ran until their lungs burned. Finally, in an alley choked with debris, they stopped to catch their breath. Daniel's side throbbed where the weapon had hit him. Leora's gaze was full of worry, but she didn't touch him. Instead, she spoke softly. "They will not stop, Daniel, because they fear what I carry." Daniel looked at her, the exhaustion in his body clashing with the confusion in his mind. "You're saying, even if it's true, they'd kill you for it?" She nodded. "And you too. If they know you are the father." Silence hung between them, broken only by the wind sighing through the ruins. Daniel glanced down the alley, watching for movement. "Then we stay ahead of them," he said finally. But Leora's voice was quiet, almost fragile. "There is more." Daniel turned to her. "More?" She hesitated, her fingers curling into the edge of her cloak. "If the child is born, it will not be just Elyari. and not just human. It will be both. Her gaze searched his face, and in all our history, that has never happened. Daniel exhaled slowly, trying to process her words. So you're saying you'd be carrying the first hybrid? Leora's voice trembled slightly. Yes. And the elders believe such a thing will destroy the balance between our people. Daniel's hand tightened on his rifle. Or maybe it could be the thing that ends the war. Leora blinked at him, as if she hadn't dared to imagine that possibility. But before either of them could speak again, a distant echo of boots on stone reached their ears. The soldiers were tracking them. Daniel pulled her deeper into the shadows. They moved silently through the narrow paths, avoiding open streets. Leora walked close, her head bowed. Daniel could feel the weight of her fear. And something else, even without looking at her. He knew her thoughts were on the life she claimed to carry. And, despite everything, he realized that part of him, the part that had felt her heartbeat and her strange pulse, wanted her to be telling the truth. The sound of boots grew louder, echoing through the ruins like war drums. Daniel's grip tightened on his rifle. Leora stayed close, her breath quick and uneven. They had been running for hours since the temple fight, but the council soldiers never stopped chasing. Every time they thought they'd shaken them off, more appeared from another street. It was like the entire city had turned into a trap. Daniel led Leora into a narrow alley where the walls leaned inward, blocking most of the light. "Keep moving," he whispered, his voice low. She nodded but clutched her side. The pace was wearing her down. Her body wasn't just injured from before, it was changing. Daniel didn't know if it was the pregnancy she claimed or the blood bond between them. But she looked pale, and the strange glow in her skin flickered like a weak flame. They emerged from the alley into what used to be a market square. The place was empty except for broken stalls and the wind scattering old papers across the stone. For a moment, Daniel thought they had a chance to rest. Then he heard it, a faint hum. He looked up and his stomach dropped. To council drones hovered above the rooftops, their lenses glowing red. "They've got eyes on us," he muttered, pulling Leora toward the nearest cover. A burst of energy fire tore into the ground where they had stood a second before. Shards of stone flew through the air. Leora stumbled, but Daniel caught her. "We can't outrun them like this," he said through gritted teeth. She glanced toward the east side of the square, her eyes narrowing. "There's a place," she said quickly. "An old shelter from the First War. Deep underground." Daniel didn't hesitate. "Lead the way." They ran again, zigzagging through shattered archways as the drones fired from above. Leora pushed herself harder than Daniel thought possible. By the time they reached the far wall of the square, her breath was ragged. She stopped before a cracked stone statue of an Eliari warrior. Beneath it, hidden under rubble, was a hatch. Daniel shoved the stones aside and yanked the hatch open. A dark stairway yawned beneath. "Them, go," he urged, and Leora slipped into the shadows. He followed, closing the hatch just as another burst of fire shook the ground above. The stairway was steep and narrow, the air cold and still. Their footsteps echoed softly. When they reached the bottom, Daniel's flashlight revealed a long chamber lined with rusted equipment and faded banners. "This was used when the humans first came to our world," Leora explained, "before the war began." Daniel set down his pack. It wasn't much, but it would give them time to think. Leora sank to the floor, leaning against the wall. Her hand rested on her stomach again. Daniel knelt beside her. "How bad is it?" She gave a tired smile. "It is not bad. Just fast. She nodded. "The life inside grows quickly." Quicker than I thought. Daniel's mind spun. If she was telling the truth, that meant whatever was happening to her, to them, wasn't following human rules. Above them, faint vibrations shook the ceiling. The soldiers were still searching. Daniel checked his rifle, counting the last of his ammunition. "They couldn't stay here long, Leora. When we leave here, we can't just keep running with." "No plan," he said. "We need somewhere safe, somewhere they won't follow." She met his eyes. "There is such a place, but it is far." "And dangerous to reach?" Daniel gave a dry chuckle. "Seems like everything is dangerous lately." For a while, they rested in silence. Daniel leaned back against the wall, letting his eyes close for a moment. Then something strange happened. A sudden warmth spread through his chest, and he knew without looking that Leora was watching him. When he opened his eyes, she smiled faintly. "You feel it too now," she said softly. He didn't answer. But he knew what she meant. That invisible thread between them, the bond that made him aware of her even when they weren't touching, was stronger than ever. Suddenly, a loud clang echoed from above. Daniel sprang to his feet. Leora stood too, her hand gripping the wall for balance. "They found the hatch," Daniel said, his voice hard. He grabbed his pack and slung it over his shoulder. "This way," Leora said, pointing to a narrow tunnel at the far end of the chamber. "It leads to the old aqueducts." They moved quickly, the tunnel walls closing in on both sides. Behind them, the sound of metal boots and shouts followed. The air grew damp and cold as they descended deeper into the underground passage. Daniel's flashlight flickered, shadows stretching long and thin. Then, far ahead, he saw faint daylight leaking through a broken grate. "That's our way out," he said. They pushed toward it, the noise of pursuit growing louder with every step. When they reached the grate, Daniel kicked it loose. The metal clanging onto wet stone, he climbed out first, scanning the area. They had emerged into a narrow river channel, the water slow and dark. Leora climbed out behind him, her cloak soaked at the edges. For a moment, Daniel thought they were clear. Then, from the shadows on the far side of the channel, a voice called out in Elyari. More soldiers stepped into view, weapons raised, blocking their path. The soldiers across the river channel stood like shadows made solid. Their armor reflected the dim light, weapons humming with deadly energy. Daniel's instincts screamed at him. There was no way to talk their way out. He shifted his stance. Rifle ready, Leora stayed behind him, her breathing uneven, one hand still pressed to her side. The soldiers stepped forward in unison, water splashing around their boots. One of them barked something in Elyari, the meaning clear from his tone: surrender. Daniel shook his head slowly. "Not happening," he muttered under his breath. The nearest soldier moved faster than Daniel. Expected energy crackled at the end of his spear, slicing through the air. Daniel rolled to the side and fired a quick burst. One shot found its mark, dropping the attacker into the shallow water. The others reacted instantly, spreading out to trap him from both sides. "Daniel?" Leora's voice was sharp with warning. He spun just in time to see another soldier lunging at her. Daniel's shot hit the soldier's weapon, the blast knocking it from his hands. But more were closing in, their boots pounding against the stone. Energy bolts flashed through the air, some close enough for Daniel to feel the heat on his skin. He returned fire, his aim sharp but his ammo running dangerously low. Leora stepped forward suddenly, a strange glow sparking across her skin. "Stay back," Daniel shouted, but she ignored him. The lead soldier swung at her, and she moved faster than he thought she could in her condition. She dodged, then slammed her palm into his chest with surprising force. Up. A burst of light exploded from the point of impact, sending the soldiers sprawling into the water. Daniel blinked. "How?" "My body is changing," she said quickly. "Your blood. It has given me more than life." There was no time to think about that. Two more soldiers charged. Daniel dropped one with a clean shot, but the last one reached him. The blow from the soldier's staff knocked the rifle from his hands. Daniel caught the next strike with his forearm, pain jolting through the bone. He shoved the attacker back, grabbed the soldier's arm, and twisted until the weapon fell away. Then he slammed his fist into the soldier's jaw, sending him stumbling into the water. But Daniel wasn't fast enough to avoid the next hit. A spear tip grazed his ribs, the searing energy leaving a smoking mark on his armor. He staggered, his legs weak. Leora was suddenly there, catching him before he fell. Her eyes glowed brighter. Now, her breathing heavy. "I will not let you die," she whispered. She knelt beside him and pressed her hand over his wound. Daniel felt a rush of warmth spread through his body. It wasn't natural. Her palm was glowing, and he could feel strength returning to his muscles. "You're healing me?" he asked, disbelief in his voice. She nodded. "As you healed me." But even as she spoke, Daniel saw the cost. Her glow flickered, and she swayed where she knelt. The healing was taking her strength. Daniel pushed himself up, ignoring the pain. The last soldier, still standing, was raising his weapon for a final strike. Daniel snatched up his fallen rifle and fired, the blast knocking the soldier back into the river channel. Silence fell, broken only by the sound of the slow-moving water. Daniel lowered the rifle, chest heaving. Leora leaned against him, her body trembling. "We have to move," she said softly. "They will send more." Daniel glanced at the fallen soldiers, knowing she was right. He slung his rifle over his shoulder and pulled her close. She was lighter than he expected to light, he realized. Then just how much the journey and the fight had drained her. They left the river channel, moving through a series of narrow stone passages. Every step felt heavier than the last. By the time they reached a small hidden alcove, Daniel knew they couldn't keep running without rest. He lowered Leora to the ground, leaning her gently against the wall. Her hand went instinctively to her stomach again. Daniel crouched beside her. "Is it?" She met his gaze and gave the smallest nod. "The life inside me is strong," she whispered, "but so fast. Much faster than I thought." Daniel looked away, trying to process the impossible truth. If she was right, they had less time than he imagined. He turned back to her. "Then we need to get somewhere safe before it's too late." She gave a tired smile. "There is one place. But it is deep inside enemy territory." Daniel frowned. "That's suicide." Her voice was calm. "It is also the only place where our child will survive." For a moment, Daniel didn't speak. The words "our child" still felt strange in his mind, but when he looked at her, pale, exhausted, and still somehow determined, he knew his choice was already made. "Then we'll get there," he said firmly. "No matter what it takes." Leora's eyes softened, and for the first time since they met, she let herself rest her head against his shoulder. Daniel kept watch, the weight of what lay ahead heavy on him. He didn't know if they'd make it through. But he knew one thing. He wasn't going to let the council take her. Daniel woke to the faint sound of water dripping from the ceiling. The alcove they had found was cold and damp, but it had kept them hidden through the night. Leora was still asleep, her head resting lightly against his shoulder. Her breathing was slow, her face peaceful despite everything. Daniel carefully shifted her so she could rest against the wall. As he stood, a strange feeling ran through him, a deep warmth spreading from his chest to his fingertips. It wasn't just warmth, it was strength. The exhaustion from the fight was gone, replaced by a sharp energy that felt unnatural. Daniel flexed his fingers, noticing how quickly the ache in his ribs had faded. The burn mark from the spear was barely visible now. He glanced at Leora, a suspicion growing in his mind, the memory of her pressing her glowing hand over his wound came back to him. She had given him more than healing. Her blood, or whatever strange power ran through her, was inside him now. Daniel stepped out of the alcove for a moment. Scanning the area, the air was thick with mist, the early light turning the ruins into a ghostly maze. Every sound seemed sharper, every shadow clearer. He could hear the faint shuffle of boots far in the distance. It wasn't normal. No human hearing was that good. When he returned, Leora was awake. Her violet eyes studied him for a long moment. "You feel it?" she said quietly. "Daniel?" Didn't bother denying it. "What did you do to me?" She tilted her head. "The same thing you did to me, Daniel. You gave me your blood to save my life, and now I have given you mine to save yours." Daniel frowned. "This isn't just a blood transfusion?" Leora shook her head. "No, it is a binding. Our lives are tied now, more than before, Daniel." Sank down beside her. "I can hear things I shouldn't be able to hear." He admitted, "My wound is gone, and I feel like I could run for hours without stopping." Leora's gaze softened. "You are changing. Slowly, but it will grow." Daniel looked away, trying to decide if that was comforting or terrifying. "What exactly am I changing into?" She hesitated before answering. "Not Elyari, not human. Something between, the weight of her." Words settled in his chest. "So now it's not just the child that's a hybrid," he said, his voice low. Leora reached for his hand. "You were part of this from the moment you gave me life." Daniel let out a slow breath. Somehow, the thought didn't scare him as much as it should. They left the alcove shortly after, moving through the mist-covered streets. Daniel noticed that every time he looked at Leora, he could sense her mood before she spoke. When she felt uneasy, his own chest tightened. When she felt a flicker of hope, it warmed him like sunlight. It was more than simple awareness. It was as if their emotions were bleeding into each other. By midday, they reached the edge of the city ruins. Ahead lay open ground, too exposed for comfort. But beyond it, Daniel could see the broken hills that led toward the territory Leora had spoken of. She paused at the edge, her eyes scanning the horizon. "The place we go. The sanctuary. Is far," she said, "but it is protected by ancient laws. Even the council will not breach it." Daniel nodded. "Then, that's where we're going." They crossed the open ground quickly. Daniel kept his senses sharp, the faintest sounds carrying to him on the wind. At one point, he stopped suddenly, raising a hand. "What is it?" Leora whispered. Daniel listened there. Faint but clear, the click of weapons being readied. He pulled her behind a jagged rock, just as a squad of soldiers crested the hill ahead. They hadn't seen them yet, but they were moving fast, searching. Daniel's mind raced. He could try to fight, but their numbers would overwhelm them. Then something new stirred in him. It wasn't just fear. It was instinct, sharp and certain. He glanced at the rocks around them. At the slope of the land, a plan came to him instantly, as if his mind had been rewired for survival. "Stay close," he told her. He moved silently along the rocks, his steps impossibly light. Even Leora looked surprised at how quiet he was. They circled wide, using the terrain to mask their movement, and slipped past the patrol without a sound when they were safely beyond the hill. Leora touched his arm. "You moved like an Elyari hunter," she said softly. "It has already begun." Daniel didn't answer, but deep down, he knew she was. Right, this bond, this change, it was accelerating. And if it kept going, he wouldn't just feel like something different. He would be something different. By nightfall, they found shelter in the remains of an old transport station. Jeez. Daniel sat with his back to the wall, rifle resting across his knees. Leora lay nearby, her breathing slow as she rested. He closed his eyes for a moment, and in the darkness behind his eyelids, he saw flashes, not memories, but images he couldn't explain. Alien skies, strange cities, faces he didn't know. When he opened his eyes again, the images faded, but a deep, certain feeling remained. Whatever was happening to him, it wasn't done yet. The wind howled through the broken hills as Daniel and Leora pressed forward. They had traveled for days without real rest, crossing ruins, rivers, and narrow mountain paths. The sanctuary was close now, Leora could feel. It and Daniel could sense her hope as clearly as his own heartbeat. But the Council's forces had not given up. Their shadow followed every step, closing in like a tightening noose by the third night. Leora could barely walk. Her glow was brighter now, but it came in waves. Flickering like firelight, Daniel carried her most of the way, his strength holding even when it should have failed. Her breathing was shallow, her voice soft. "It is almost time," she whispered. "The child will come soon." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Then we make it to the sanctuary before that happens." The final stretch was through a canyon-high walls on both sides, the path winding between jagged rock. It felt too quiet. Daniel's sharpened senses picked up the faint vibration of movement ahead. He stopped, setting Leora gently on her feet. "They're here," he murmured. Even before she could answer, the first shot rang out, a streak of energy slamming into the canyon wall beside them. Soldiers emerged from both ends of the canyon, their armor gleaming in the dim light. Daniel's rifle was in his hands in an instant. "Stay behind me," he ordered. Leora pressed her back to the rock, one hand clutching her stomach. The air filled with the hum of energy weapons and the echo of footsteps. Daniel fired, dropping 2 soldiers before they could close in, but there were too many. He switched position constantly, using the rocks for cover. Each time an enemy moved toward Leora, something inside him flared an instinct deeper than fear, and his shots became deadly precise. A blast grazed his shoulder, spinning him sideways. Pain flared. But the bond between them pulsed, flooding him with renewed strength. He pushed forward, breaking through the first wave of soldiers. Then a heavy impact knocked him to the ground. His rifle skidded out of reach. The soldier above him raised a spear. Daniel caught the shaft before it could pierce his chest. For a moment, they struggled, the soldier's strength against his own. Then Daniel twisted, slamming the soldier into the ground and taking the weapon. More came, but now Daniel moved like a storm. Every motion fast, every strike decisive. The glow in his eyes matched Leora's faint light. He fought not just as a soldier, but as something more, something new. When the last soldier fell, the canyon was silent except for their breathing. Daniel dropped the spear and turned to Leora. She was on her knees, her face pale. "It's time," she gasped. Daniel's heart pounded. He lifted her into his arms and ran. The end of the canyon opened into a wide, hidden valley. At its center stood a massive stone arch carved with alien symbols. Even from a distance, Daniel could feel its power, ancient and unyielding. "This is the sanctuary," Leora whispered, her voice weak. He carried her under the arch. And instantly, the air changed. The sound of the wind faded. The world felt still and safe. Daniel laid her down on a bed of soft grass. "What do I do?" he asked, panic flickering in his voice. She smiled faintly. "You stay. And you do not let go of my hand." The birth was unlike anything Daniel had imagined. Light surrounded them, shifting in colors he had never seen before. The air hummed with a low, soothing sound. Leora's grip on his hand was strong. Her eyes locked on his. He could feel everything she felt, the pain, the effort, and the unshakable determination. And beneath it all, the deep, fierce love for the life they were bringing into the world. When it was over, the light faded. Leora lay back, exhausted but smiling. In her arms was a small figure, skin pale like his, but with a faint glow like hers. The child's eyes opened, and Daniel froze. They were violet, but flecked with gold. Leora's voice was barely above a whisper. "Our child. Proof that we can be one people." Daniel took the child into his arms. A weight settled over him, not of fear, but of responsibility. The war outside, the hatred between their kinds, it all felt distant now. What mattered was here, in his hands. At the edge of the valley, shadows moved. Council soldiers had arrived. But when they saw the child, they hesitated. Even through their helmets, Daniel saw the flicker of uncertainty. Leora's voice was soft but steady. This is the future. Protect it. Daniel stood, holding the child close. He met the soldier's gaze and felt no fear. Whatever happened next, he would face it. Because this was no longer just about survival. It was about changing the world, one heartbeat at a time.